Remember not so long ago when France's president blasted NATO as being brain dead, wondering aloud what purpose it served? Well, that was then. This is now. The biggest invasion Europe's seen since World War II has the alliance scrambling, shoring up defenses on its eastern flank, and trying to beef up its battle readiness in real time. We're going to be asking about Thursday's summit of NATO and the allies' red line when it comes to Russia. Exactly 1 month after Vladimir Putin launched what many predicted would be a lightning offensive. France 24 will take you to Irpin a little bit later on, one of those frontline suburbs of the capital where Ukrainians now claim to be on the counter-offensive, or at least playing to a stalemate. Turning point, or are the Russians, who, let's not forget, enjoy air supremacy, simply taking their time while they pound major urban centers? Anti-air support, one of those keys that NATO has to ponder as it decides whether it wants to contain the damage, as the Kremlin's army flattens cities like Mariupol, or steps up military assistance in what could lead to the kind of confrontation on the battlefield never seen at any time during the Cold War. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what are NATO's red lines. Joining us, he's a former French Air Force Chief of Staff, retired General Jean-Paul Paloméros, was a top commander at NATO Allied Forces. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome back as well to Ukrainian political scientist Anastasia Shapochkina, president of the Eastern Circles think tank.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. From Brussels, we'll be joined by Green member of the European Parliament, Michael Bloss. And covering this triple summit day is France 24 correspondent Dave Keating. Thanks for being with us, Dave.
Happy to be here.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, a triple summit day. It kicked off with NATO, and that ran over, way over, with leaders coming out of it, just a short while ago, displaying a united front, though.
Putin was banking on NATO being split. My early conversation with him in December and early January, it was clear to me he didn't think we could sustain this cohesion. NATO has never been more united than it is today. Putin is getting exactly the opposite what he intended to have as a consequence of going into Ukraine. We've built that same unity with the European Union and with the leading democracies of the G7.
NATO never more united, says Joe Biden, but there are nuances and differences. The Atlantic Alliance, yes, agreeing to shore up defenses, offer defensive assistance to Ukraine to protect against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. But as the Secretary General himself admits, not going all in, and you can hear the nuances in Jens Stoltenberg's remarks.
We are determined to do all we can to support Ukraine. And I welcome the concrete offers of assistance made by allies today. At the same time, we have a responsibility to ensure the conflict does not escalate further, because this would be even more dangerous and more devastating.
Dave Keating, break it down for us. What was the argument among members that made that meeting go on for so long?
Well, I think it's just there's so much to deal with, right? There were certain things that I'm told went through pretty smoothly. So these, for instance, the 4 new battle groups that they're going to send over to Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia, that didn't have any significant opposition. But apparently the language on China was a bit of a tricky issue. So Secretary General Stoltenberg had already signaled yesterday that the statement at the end of this NATO meeting would have something to say about China not condemning Russia's invasion, and of course it abstaining in the UN vote condemning the invasion. But how strong that was going to be had to be determined today. In the end, it's not very strong. The statement calls on China to not aid Russia in any way, but it doesn't mention anything about China's heretofore implicit or explicit support for Russia. And I'm told this was quite a back and forth during the summit. At his concluding press press conference, French President Emmanuel Macron said that in his mind, NATO is something that involves the North Atlantic, and it wasn't really appropriate to start getting into condemning China in resolution. Similarly, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi said the same thing. He said this is not a condemnation of China. That is not what we were aiming to do here. German Chancellor Scholz said something similar, and that's because there were Eastern European leaders, I'm told, during this summit that were really pushing for stronger language here and like a really clear condemnation. But a lot of the Western European leaders just didn't think that was going to be productive or really would overstep the bounds of what NATO is really supposed to be doing.
Those Eastern European countries that you mention are also the ones that are most vocal when it comes to things like, well, no-fly zones or helping out more with the air defenses of Ukraine. And we heard, Dave, for instance, the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, saying there'll be no no-fly zone and there'll be no boots on the ground.
Yep, we heard basically everyone say that. I think President Macron said that they have to be careful not to become a co-belligerent in this war, but they should do everything up to that line, everything up to the line that would cross becoming a belligerent, because he stressed NATO is not at war with Russia. And I was interesting, I was at the Boris Johnson press conference as well, and I was wondering if he would toe the line there, because Boris Johnson has kind of a habit of getting ahead of himself, I think, sometimes when he's talking about this stuff and he wants to maybe sound tough or go beyond the remit. But he was also very careful about this, and he was kind of prodded a couple of times by reporters at that press conference, but he didn't take the bait. He didn't go further than what was really the agreed line here at the NATO summit, which is that NATO and Russia going to war would be a disaster, and they have to do everything they can to prevent the war spreading beyond Ukraine.
We're looking at live images coming in now of Joe Biden being welcomed by the European Council President Charles Michel. Again, it's triple summit day, what with Biden also in attendance for the G7, NATO, and now to speak at the EU a little bit late. You look at those images, Jean-Paul Paloméros, it's a reminder, and we heard Joe Biden say it earlier, it's 100,000 U.S. troops in Europe. I mean, the United States is central to all of this right now.
Well, NATO is a collective political and military alliance and since 1949. And what NATO is doing since 2014, and I was there at this time, is just to resurrect in a certain way the collective defense mission, which is the core of its mission. Saying, well, we have decreased the budget. We have been decreasing the budget, defense budget, for quite a long time since the end of the Cold War. And we consider that there was out-of-area conflicts, but it was the time in 2014 really to recall that collective defense was the main effort. And therefore, we pushed this objective for the countries, NATO countries, to spend 2% of their GDPs to work together.
Let me interrupt you. Let's try to listen in to the European Council President and the U.S. President.
It's a very strong signal. Our unity is rock solid, and we are very, very pleased to coordinate, to cooperate with you. These are difficult times, challenging times, and we need to take the right and the intelligent decisions for the future, for the security, for the stability, and thank you for this excellent cooperation and coordination.
Well, I came to congratulate a man who just got reelected without opposition. I dream about that someday. Well, look, from the very beginning, I was of the view the single most important thing that we have to do in the West is be united. I'm not saying that's not a euphemism. I mean it literally. Literally. I spent some time with Vladimir Putin back in November and December, and we had a conference in Switzerland at the time, and it was clear to me, and it was to you, that his intentions were very different than benign intentions. And one of the things that he's tried to do, his overwhelming objective, and I've been speaking about it for a year and a half, his overwhelming objective is to demonstrate that democracies cannot function in the 21st century because things are moving so rapidly. They require consensus, and it's too difficult to get consensus, and autocracies are going to rule. As a matter of fact, we've lost more democratic countries, fewer democratic countries today than there were 10 years ago. And so from the very beginning, my objective, and I had a great partner in this, was to see to it that we built total, complete unity among the major democracies of the world. I'm not joking about that. That's why I called just a couple weeks ago and asked NATO to set up a NATO meeting of the heads of state, and which took place today. And I fortunately was able to attend 2 other conferences. But my point is unity. And the very thing that Putin has tried to do from the beginning, and I've been saying this since my days as Vice President of the United States, is to break up NATO. Break up NATO. He'd rather face 30 independent countries than 30 united countries with the United States of America. Not a joke. I'm being deadly earnest. I believe that's been his intention from the very, very beginning. And so what I want to thank Michel for is that the whole idea of the unity of Europe as a whole, not just NATO, the G7 and this organization, really matters. It's the single most important thing that we can do to stop this guy who's in our country we believe has already committed war crimes. But thank you very much for the time, and thank you. Yes, we will discuss China. I've spent some time with Xi Jinping, and I hope we're going to get a chance to discuss China.
All right, the arrival of Joe Biden to the European Council, welcomed by the European Council President Charles Michel. It's again a NATO summit day. Michael Bloss is with us, a Green member of the European Parliament. 3 summits this Thursday, and the coincidence of the calendar again is that it's been 1 month since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. How strong, Michael, is that unity that you just heard Joe Biden trumpet?
The unity is there, and that is really good, and it's necessary in times of war. There is a strong solidarity with the people in Ukraine against the aggression of Putin, against his attack. We see that, from Poland to Germany, all of Europe, and also Germany, for instance, changed some of its policies in order to create more unity. We have abandoned Nord Stream 2. We are increasing the military spending. We are sending weapons to Ukraine. So yeah, it changed a lot. It's necessary. I also believe that we have to not only look at now the military side, but also how to make sure we do not buy Putin's gas, oil, and coal anymore. This should be one of the priorities, and unfortunately, there's not too much debate about moving fast away from fossils. I hope that European leaders will discuss this today as well and make decisions to speed up their actions.
Yeah, pooling energy purchases, finding other sources is at the heart of that EU summit that's getting underway. You talked about Germany increasing its military spending. How much has changed in 1 month on that score?
Well, our foreign minister has described it well when she said, we woke up in a different world, and that's the truth. The world is different, and we have to rethink some of our policies, and we did so. So since 1 month, really a lot has changed. What we should be now keeping in mind and remembering from the crisis, from the corona crisis, there is no value in crisis nationalism. If now, like, Europe falls apart and everyone is doing their own small policies, that will not help. We need to keep the unity in Europe together with the United States. That is what makes us strong.
And Anastasia Shapochkina, your reaction listening to what Michael Bloss is saying about that newfound unity?
Not just Michael Bloss, but what Joe Biden was saying about newfound unity. I just have one question. It's unity in what? And so far what we're seeing is that the unity that the European leaders are so desperate to demonstrate, and so transatlantic leaders, is the unity in doing pretty much as little as possible on the military side. And this unity is pushed by their being squeezed between realization of two simple things. One is that, and I think this is exactly as Boris Johnson said, NATO is not at war with Russia. What everybody's realizing, think NATO members as well, that it's rather Russia which is at war, not just with Ukraine, and that Russia has repeated over and over again, but with the civilized world as we know it, with NATO as well. And the realization that the NATO members are squeezed between the two things is that one is the reputational pressure to act, and the other is to act as little as possible, because out of the fear of the action itself, and out of the fear of the realization that militarily the action margins are rather thin. And pretty much this explains the talk of unity, but unity in doing what?
Michael Bloss, your reaction, is NATO, excuse the expression, shooting itself in the foot by stating at the outset, as so many leaders have, that they don't want to put boots on the ground and that they won't be a no-fly zone?
Look, I can really understand there is a dire need for a no-fly zone. But for the whole of the Cold War, we have made it possible that there were no direct confrontation or direct conflict between NATO and between this time the Soviet Union, because this could easily escalate to a nuclear war, and this would help no one. So I think we have to be sensible here. I would disagree that there is like as little as possible. Germany made a 180-degree turn in terms of its policy on sending weapons to conflict zones. Now Germany also is saying that they are increasing, and they will put 100 billion euros for military spending. A lot of things has happened, and I think the support from the EU is one part of the success of Ukraine. Of course, the Ukrainians are fighting like heroes. There is no doubt about this, but there is support from the West, and this is also part that is making sure that Putin did not actually achieve what he wanted. He did not walk to Kiev, but since 1 month he is being held up by very brave Ukrainian fighters, but also they are supported by the European Union.
General Palameros, 1 month on, how is it going in your view?
Well, there is a kind of stalemate. Obviously, Putin has missed his strategy. He has difficulty with his military capabilities in a certain way, and he has his soldiers have problem with moral and with the sense of purpose. There is no sense of purpose for them. So you can see that the Russian army is quite in a dire strait in a certain way. They are still very strong. They are bombing everywhere and indiscriminately. That's really a pity. But I think NATO has done what it has to do. That's collective defense of its member. This is his mission, his main mission. If we want to go further, it is for the members to decide if they want or not to go further. But so far, they have demonstrated a solidarity in doing that and in providing the Ukrainians as much as they can. It's perhaps not enough. I can understand the frustration, but weapons, training since 2014, exercising, and the standards of Ukrainian army is very high, thanks to this partnership. Ukraine is an avant-garde of democracy, this is true. Unfortunately, the border, the red line of NATO is beyond that, beyond Ukraine. And that's That's a mess.
Let's try to define a little bit that red line. At the outset of the war, the United States balked at the idea of sending some of Poland's Russian-made MiG fighter jets over to Ukraine. Now, and we're looking at this map here of how NATO has expanded. The countries in light blue are the most recent members to join the alliance. The ones in yellow are the ones who are not in the alliance but are candidates, including most prominently in the center of that map, Ukraine itself. The focus is turning right now to anti-aircraft batteries. 3 nations, Greece and more recent NATO members, Bulgaria and Slovakia, still use the same Russian-made S-300 long-range missile systems that Ukraine's military knows how to operate. Last week, Germany and the Netherlands brought US-made Patriot missiles to Slovakia, which shares a border with Ukraine, and which has said it would be willing to provide its S-300 system to Ukraine if it got a replacement. So, General Paloméros, should those S-300s be shipped over to Ukraine?
Yes, very much so. Air defense is absolutely crucial because the Russians have a kind of air superiority. So everything we can do to suppress the air superiority of Russia is good for. And I think air defense, a very effective air defense system that they can employ is absolutely crucial. Anti-tank as well, some offensive weapons.
Is it going to happen?
I think so.
And how fast?
Well, as soon as they can, but I think it could come very fast.
Dave Keating, was that on the table today at NATO?
They didn't discuss that.
It was, this discussion about what exactly type of equipment they need has been a big point of discussion. And Boris Johnson was asked about this at his press conference because President Zelensky was asking for planes and tanks and really very, very big pieces of military equipment. And the question is, who knows best what the Ukrainians need? Is it the Ukrainians themselves, or is it the American military? Is it the Western European militaries? I didn't see a big move toward changing the type of armaments that are being sent to Ukraine today. I think the consensus that came out of the summit, was that the type of armaments that have already been being delivered, they should continue in that vein. And I think for sure those missiles, the surface-to-air missiles, is one of those things that seems to be very talked about. And in his press conference, President Macron seemed to suggest that he thought that crossing the line over into planes and tanks that weren't already contracted before the start of the war could risk making France or any other country a co-belligerent in the war. I'm not sure that other leaders share that opinion, but at least that seems to be part of the French thinking here.
Do you share that opinion, General Paloméros?
Well, in any case, they shouldn't tell the Russian what they send. They shouldn't tell the Russian. This is confidential. We don't have to explain to the Russian what kind of capability we are giving to the Ukrainians. They will discover that for their own detriment, if I may say so.
Anastasia Shapochkina, we did hear our correspondents earlier telling us here on France 24 that they are seeing the Ukrainians with some new weapons on the battlefield.
Indeed, this would be a major advance if the S-300s were sent. That's precisely what Ukraine has been asking for. I totally agree with the general that it would be entirely ridiculous just to say exactly what is going to be done. And maybe that's the point of President Macron. President Macron has so far shown himself as one of the closest allies of President Zelensky, indeed, and which is based truly not just on political statements or political opportunism, which we could have observed with President Sarkozy or Hollande, but rather on a personal rapport also between the two presidents, and truly a true shift for the French traditional foreign policy, much greater involvement in the region, which is kind of a divorce from traditional positions. I would also like to, so yes, if the S-300 or other similar weapons were to be delivered, that'd be a major advance, and for Ukraine, crucial and really a life-saving, a lifeline. I would also just like to, if you allow me to also answer answer what the general was saying before about Russia, NATO's mission. And yes, indeed, that's what's been underlined today during the summit, that the NATO's mission is to stand united. But if we look at NATO's history, it is much broader than to stay united. NATO wasn't founded in order to stay united. Neither was it founded in order to protect each other. It was founded in order to counter Russian aggression and Russian expansion. That is NATO's mission. And they must stand united for that. That's exactly what we're seeing today. And that's precisely why today, much more than ever before, than ever during the inaction, during the absence of war, when the existential crisis of NATO was being discussed years back, this is today the existential crisis.
I mean, before
and even months back, exactly.
Thank you,
Francois.
Very recently,
precisely. Why does NATO exist? And we have to re-ask this question today, because the reason why NATO exists is not to stand united. It is to counter Russian aggression. And that's the real mission. And that mission is there to be fulfilled today.
There was some dramatic words earlier by some of the East European members upon their arrivals at that NATO summit. There are those who worry that this could all lead to World War III, and others caution that letting Putin win in Ukraine would prove an existential threat for everyone.
Nobody can feel safe now. Maybe it will be Poland. Maybe it will be Baltic states, but nobody in Europe, even those countries which are distant from the direct border with Russia, even those countries are not safe today. This is a challenge. This is a challenge for the entire region, for democratic world, Western principles. Maybe it will be the last challenge, but we cannot lose it.
Dave Keating, that's a clip of the president of the former Soviet state of Lithuania, which is now an EU member, a NATO member, and which borders both Belarus and that Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Did you get the sense again today that this is viewed as an existential threat, not just for Ukraine?
For sure. I mean, those Eastern European, particularly the three former Soviet Baltic states, you can see that they're very alarmed, and we hear this consistently from their leaders. There is a bit of an East-West split here. I think everyone is alarmed, appalled, shocked by what's happening in Ukraine, but you feel the sense of urgency more the further east that you go. You also hear, I think, more bellicose rhetoric. We've even had the French president suggesting again today, saying that it would be on the table at this summit that NATO should put boots on the ground in Ukraine as a peacekeeping force that could theoretically defend itself. That's a non-starter for most EU partners, but I think you do really see that contrast, especially as these summits are starting and you're having the various leaders come in, whether it's NATO or the European Union. The tone is quite different between the West and the East. The East really pushing also for energy sanctions, just wanting to go the furthest possible in every area. And then in the West, you're hearing more caution. You're hearing more warnings about what a NATO-Russia conflict could turn into in terms of World War III, nuclear war, etc. You really are seeing that difference. And I think actually that the further away we get from the 24th of February, the further away we get from the invasion, the more those differences are showing. They're not showing less, they're showing more over time.
Showing more over time, you agree, General Paloméros?
I'm not sure. I mean, there are sensibilities, of course, but they all agree on the defensive line, on the red line, basically, of the borders, because this is part of the alliance and the North Atlantic treaties. It applies to its members. We can discuss that. We can be sorry. We can be frustrated. But and we know that Mr. Putin has done everything he could to avoid that Ukraine and a few others, but Ukraine mainly, join NATO. When he went into Ukraine in 2014, he knew that since this moment, it was absolutely impossible to integrate Ukraine in NATO because of the Article 5, because Ukraine was divided, because so he really made it not impossible, but very difficult, and nobody discussed that at the end of the day. We accepted, and this is perhaps the main question and the main problem that we accepted Crimea annexion, and there were voices in France finding that quite normal. It was not, and Donbass as well. That was the main mistake at this time, that we didn't do anything, and we pushed
Those
Putin.
voices were across the political spectrum,
Yes,
including in the military hierarchy.
Well, not in the military. That was different. We are very friends with Ukraine. We worked and as partners, so we were really sorry, if I may say so, and I was quite amazed that there was no real reaction after this annexion. That was a brutal intrusion of a main power, nuclear power, into a sovereign country. And so now we are paying this price a few years later. This is my point. Too late is too late. That was in 2014 that we should have shown muscles. But at this time, NATO was not so strong as today in terms of capability, in terms of solidarity. You know, we were in the decrease, the dividend of peace were there, and we had to resurrect in a certain way, for sure, the Atlantic Alliance as a whole.
Was Donald Trump, and Barack Obama did the same, but was Donald Trump right in badgering NATO members to pay more their dues, to pick up the slack?
In a certain way, he was. He was. That was what I found in 2012 when I joined NATO, that the collective defense needs a credibility. The alliance is nothing if it is not military credible. And we had to rebuild the credibility of NATO. But in 2014, we had not the solidarity to face the Russians saying, well, you have gone too far. So now we have the following.
2014, Russia annexes Crimea. 2022, it invades Ukraine as a whole. 10 days ago, the strategic northern Kiev suburb of Irpin looks set to fall. And yet it hasn't happened so far. That was the day France 24 senior correspondent Cyril Payen was pinned down by Russian fire. Let's take a look.
You okay? Yes, man, I'm okay. I'm ready. Good. I'm ready to rumble. Let's ready to rumble.
Where are they? Are they close?
What?
They are close now.
The bastards are striking us. They're trying to destroy our artillery. We're going to answer back. We're going to massacre them.
Are you okay, Legionnaire?
Yes, I'm fine.
It's not very far, right?
That's okay. Did they just destroy the bridge?
No problem.
And you'll be able to see that reported full in Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. Anastasia Shapochkina, what it illustrates, what that clip we saw, is the resilience. These are civilians. For some of them, there's a former French legionnaires of Ukrainian nationalities, the guy with the woolly hat. Who's come back. You have this incredible resilience. We thought maybe it would last a couple of days. It's been 1 month.
I think that to understand the resilience of the Ukrainians that we're seeing now, we just have to have a look back at Ukrainian history. And it's very easy to understand. Already, Ukrainian democracy has its roots in the tradition of Ukrainian Cossacks, which were based on the Zaporizhia siege, like Zaporizhia nuclear power plant today. And that was a community of pretty much military men, which ruled by direct democracy, who elect their leader. He does what they want. He's good. If he doesn't, he can get killed. And that was a medieval society which ruled like that. Direct democracy, which pretty much that. Then, as that community was eventually merged, then integrated into the Russian army or crushed by the Russians, the Ukrainian national unity re-emerged later. And we've seen, especially since during the Russian Revolution briefly, but then especially since 1991, and that today we see the courage, especially since 2005, through Ukrainian civil society, and 2014 again through Ukrainian civil society, which showed, as opposed to Russian or Belarusian civil society, that they are ready to die for their freedom, to die on the streets or to die in the battlefield. The big difference, and that what General had underlined before, between the Ukrainian and Russian soldiers today on the ground, is that the Russian soldiers are there to defend and to fight for absolutely nothing, while Ukrainians are there to defend and to fight for the lives of their children, for their own homes, and for their own quarters. To give you an example, one of the most influential people in Ukraine, and Ukraine as being criticized of corrupt country, etc., was a former Minister of Interior, Avakov. Avakov is from Kharkiv. He was fired pretty much together with a bunch of generals by Zelensky when Zelensky assumed power in order to gain political clout and to gain his own, basically, reins on the power. And those same people, that's Avakov's testimony in a recent interview just 2 weeks ago. Those same people, including himself, were called back by Zelensky right now. Those same people he had fired, they all came back. They all answered the call. And Avakov, the person you can say almost an enemy, right, of Zelensky, because he was fired by him. He was put by Zelensky to defend Kyiv. In charge of defending Kyiv itself, Zelensky himself. And why does Zelensky have such confidence in his former adversaries, political adversaries? But because Avakov is from Kharkiv, and he saw his whole neighborhood of 500,000 people destroyed and just being leveled to the ground. That person and those people, now we're not talking about the corruption or whatever was true yesterday, is not true today, because that society today is totally different society. It has nothing to do. Also to underline that some of these Ukrainian soldiers, they are there because they volunteered, they went, they changed their civilian clothing for soldier clothing. Some of them are women. In fact, about 1/5 of them are women. Some of these people, they're fighting in couples. They leave their child, the small children, to their grandmas who then flees the country, and they go to fight together. And I want you to think back to the Spartans, who often, and to the Greeks and to the Greek warriors, who often fought, who were such a strong army because they often fought together with their lovers. That time it was gay culture. But just to say, and that made that army so resilient, because you are not just fighting for some guy you just met 2 days ago in a bush. You're not fighting because you were sent by a mad dog of Europe to fight with no provision, with no logistics. You're not fighting under the N+1, under the little bosses who do not even evacuate the wounded from the battlefield because they haven't even been given the capacity to evacuate them. You're fighting for your own land and for your own future.
Amazing testimony. At the same time, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Does Russia need to have morale, as General Palomero said? I ask that because they have that air supremacy. They're saying that an estimated 90% of buildings in the besieged port city of Mariupol have either been damaged or destroyed. Is time on Vladimir Putin's side?
Absolutely. And that's a very good point. As World War II experience of the Soviet army, of which Russian army made the vast majority shows, and of course all of the leadership came from Moscow, Russia's men are expendable, and that has always been so throughout the Russian military history, and it remains so today. That's why you cannot draw one single number as to the number of Russian dead, whether it is an Afghan war, the Chechen war #1, #2, or even World War II, for which the victim estimates went from 7 million right after the war to 27 million in the 90s. And they are expendable, hence you can expend as many of them as you please as the rule of Russia. And then, of course, quantity can replace quality for sure. Even if one Ukrainian soldier is worth 5 Russian soldiers, let's say, because of his motivation, or 10, or the weapon, or the resilience, etc. But if there are 100 Russian soldiers in the long run for 1 Ukrainian soldier, that's pretty much, we are in the 300 Spartans scenario. And that, of course, is something that by looking at the map, you see Russia is sitting literally on top of Ukraine.
When France loses a soldier in Mali, it's front page news. There's a burial ceremony at the National Armory, the Invalides. If the Russians are willing to use what we call cannon fodder, does that give them an undisputable advantage?
Well, a number is an advantage until a certain stage, until it is bearable by the society. Obviously, there is a huge disinformation campaign in Russia. Let's see how far it goes. And I would posit that we will need to do better in communication, offensive communication, if I may say so. We need to reach the Russian with the good message. This is one part of the equation. But I think the mother will see their boy coming back in coffins. And so it could change. If we are able to fight the Russian historic, the Putin language and the Putin resetting history, I think we can help the Ukrainians really to achieve their aim, and providing the weapons they need, providing now, but not tomorrow, but now.
And there's still more to be done on that, you're saying.
Anti-ship missiles as well. I stressed anti-ship missiles is important because the Russian has not only air superiority, but they're
shelling Mariupol from the Sea of Azov.
They have maritime superiority, but it's quite easy to fight with anti-ship missiles.
Dave Keating, we heard President Biden in his press conference several times asked about another one of those red lines. We all remember it from Syria in 2013, which is if Russia uses chemical weapons. He said, quote, "We would respond. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use," kind of like what General Paloméros was saying earlier, playing his cards close to his chest. Do you feel coming out of today, and again, you weren't in the room, but do you feel as though when it comes to defining its red lines, NATO is there, closer to it?
This is the thing. We don't know if there are red lines behind closed doors that we don't know about, but certainly the leaders are not willing to put their cards on the table right now in terms of what the red lines are. They won't do it for chemical weapons. They won't do it for war crimes. And all of the leaders after today's summits reiterated that line. They won't put a red line down, and I think that President Macron even said specifically red lines are only useful if they act as a deterrent, and he's not sure that that's the current situation right now. What we don't know is if they've agreed among themselves what would be the red line. What would be the red line to turn France or any other country from a kind of observer of the war, assisting Ukraine but not at war with Russia, into a co-belligerent and actually put NATO at war with Russia. We don't know what that red line is, and I'm not sure if the leaders themselves know.
We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Much more to talk about. I want to thank you so much, Dave Keating, covering those triple summits that have been taking place in Brussels and are continuing well into the night. I want to thank as well retired General Jean-Paul Paloméros, Anastasia Shapochkina. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Much more coverage of the war in Ukraine on France24.com.